Ever wondered how societies kept ordered before our modern laws and police forces? For much of human history, the answer was simple and brutal. Fear. Governments and rulers believed that to control the masses, you had to make an example of those who stepped out of line, and the more public and terrifying the punishment, the better. This wasn't just about justice for a crime committed. It was a performance, a spectacle designed to send a crystal-clear message to everyone watching. This could be you. Imagine living in a time where a trip to the town square might mean witnessing a live, state-sanctioned horror show. These public punishments were a grim form of entertainment and a powerful tool of social control. The goal was to engrave the consequences of disobedience into the public's memory. From the stocks and pillories, where people were locked in place for public humiliation, to more severe and gruesome methods, each punishment was a lesson in power. The authorities wanted to show everyone, from the common peasant to the ambitious noble, who was in charge. It was a raw, visceral display of the state's authority over life and death. Let's talk about some of these methods. The stocks, for example, might seem mild today, but they were incredibly effective at shaming individuals. Locked by the ankles and sometimes wrists, a person was left exposed for hours or even days. Passorsby could throw rotten food, garbage, or insults. It was social death, a stripping away of dignity that could ruin a person's reputation forever. The pillory was similar, but it secured the head and hands, forcing the person to stand, often in an uncomfortable, stooped position. This wasn't just physical discomfort. It was a psychological ordeal designed to break a person's spirit in front of their entire community. But public humiliation was just the beginning. As we go deeper into history, the methods become far more severe. Branding, for instance, permanently marked a person as a criminal. A hot iron would be used to burn a letter or symbol onto their skin, often on the face or hand, so they could never escape their past. Imagine carrying a visible sign of your crime for the rest of your life, a constant reminder to you and everyone you meet. This wasn't just punishment. It was a lifelong sentence of social exclusion. And then there were the truly terrifying spectacles. Public executions were major events. Scaffolds were built in prominent locations, and crowds would gather, sometimes in a grim, festival-like atmosphere. The methods varied across cultures and eras, but the purpose was always the same: to demonstrate the ultimate power of the state. These events were carefully orchestrated. The procession of the condemned, the final words, the execution itself, it was all part of a dark theater meant to inspire awe and terror. The message was unmistakable: challenge authority, and you will pay the highest price, not in private, but for all the world to see. This history, while dark, reveals so much about the evolution of justice and human rights. It reminds us how far we've come in our understanding of law, order, and what it truly means. Ever wondered why ancient punishments were so incredibly brutal? It wasn't just random cruelty. There was a method to the madness, and it all boils down to one simple, powerful emotion: fear. Imagine you're an ancient ruler. You've got a massive kingdom, but your resources are stretched thin. You don't have thousands of police officers on every corner, no high-tech surveillance, and sending a message from one end of your empire to the other could take weeks. How do you keep millions of people in line? How do you prevent rebellion when your grip on power feels so fragile? You make an example. You turn punishment into a public spectacle. This wasn't about justice as we know it today. It was about psychological warfare. When a criminal was caught, their punishment wasn't carried out behind the closed doors of a prison. It happened in the town square, in front of everyone, women, and even children. The goal was to burn a terrifying image into the collective memory of the populace. Think about it. Seeing a thief's hand cut off, or a traitor being subjected to an agonizing public execution sent a message. This is what happens when you defy authority. This is the price of disobedience. The pain inflicted on one person was meant to ripple through the entire community, creating a deep-seated fear that would deter anyone else from even thinking about breaking the law. The memory of the screams, the sight of the suffering, that was the real deterrent. It was a far more effective control mechanism than any small, underfunded city watch could ever be. Leaders believed that the more intense the pain, the stronger the lesson. A quick, painless death wouldn't have the same impact. It had to be a drawn-out, horrifying performance. This theatricality of punishment was designed to show the absolute power of the ruler. It reinforced the idea that the state had control not just over your freedom, but over your very body, your life, and your death. It was the ultimate demonstration of dominance, in a world where projecting strength was essential for survival. But it wasn't just about practical social control. Religion and superstition played a huge role too. In many ancient cultures, a crime wasn't just an offense against another person or the state. It was an offense against the gods. A criminal act could be seen as a stain on the entire community, something that could bring down divine wrath in the form of plagues, famines, or military defeats. From this perspective, a harsh punishment wasn't just about scaring people straight. It was a form of ritual purification. By subjecting the offender to extreme suffering, the community believed they were cleansing themselves of the sin, appeasing the angry deities, and restoring cosmic balance. The pain of the individual was a sacrifice made for the spiritual well-being of the group. Sometimes, the specific punishment was even believed to mirror the crime in a divinely ironic way, a concept known as lex talionis, or an eye for an eye, but taken to extreme lengths. Tradition also had a powerful grip. Once a certain form of punishment was established, it became deeply ingrained in the culture. People came to expect it. A ruler who suddenly decided to be lenient might not be seen as compassionate, but as weak. They might be accused of failing to uphold justice or disrespecting the ancestors. So, for generations, these brutal practices continued. Not just because they were effective, but because they were simply the way things were always done. So, when we look back at the horrifying punishments of the past, we're not just seeing cruelty, we're seeing a complex web of fear, power, social control, religious belief, and tradition. It was a system born from the limitations of the ancient world, a brutal solution to the timeless problem of how to maintain order. Understanding this doesn't excuse the brutality, but it does help us see why our ancestors acted the way they did, and it makes us appreciate how much our own concepts of justice have evolved. Have you ever wondered why old town squares were often the site of some of history's darkest events? It's a chilling thought, but for centuries, these central hubs were not just for markets and festivals. They were theaters of fear, designed to display the ultimate power of the state through public executions. This wasn't a hidden act. It was a spectacle, an event. Families would gather, sometimes bringing their children. Imagine that a day that included watching a person's life end. It was a calculated performance, meant to be unforgettable. The message was brutally clear. This could be you. This constant, visible threat of extreme punishment wasn't just about punishing one individual. It was about controlling everyone else. It created what historians call a culture of silence. People learned very quickly that speaking out against the king, the church, or any authority could lead them to that same platform. Fear became the invisible ruler of daily life, shaping what people said, what they wrote, and even what they dared to think. It was a powerful tool for maintaining order, but at a terrible cost to freedom and personal expression. This system twisted the very idea of justice. Instead of being a process of finding truth and fairness, trials and executions often became demonstrations of power. It wasn't always about whether the person was truly guilty. It was about making an example of them. The more public and gruesome the punishment, the stronger the message. This meant that the accused had very little chance of a fair hearing, especially if they were poor or lacked powerful connections. Justice became a weapon for the powerful, not a shield for the innocent. The long-term effects of this are profound. Generations grew up believing that questioning authority was not only dangerous, but morally wrong. This deep-seated fear stifled progress, innovation, and social change. Why risk everything for a new idea when the old one is enforced with an axe or a noose? It taught people to conform, to keep their heads down, and to distrust their neighbors, who might be informers. This environment of suspicion could tear communities apart from the inside, leaving everyone isolated and powerless. So, how did this era come to an end? It wasn't a sudden change. It was a slow, difficult shift in thinking. Philosophers and reformers during the Enlightenment began to argue that such cruel punishments were uncivilized and ineffective. They promoted new ideas about human rights, dignity, and the purpose of law. They argued that justice should be about rehabilitation, not just terror. People started to question whether the state had the right to be so brutal. This new way of thinking slowly gained ground, leading to legal reforms and eventually the abolition of public executions in most of the world. Looking back, we see that the end of public executions was a major step forward for civilization. It marked a transition from a society ruled by fear to one that at least strived for justice and human dignity. It reminds us how fragile these values are and why it is so important to protect systems of fair trials, free speech, and the rule of law. The empty town squares stand as a silent testament to a time when justice was a spectacle of horror, and they challenge us to ensure it never becomes that way again. What do you think? Have you ever wondered about the harshest punishments in history? The ones designed not just to end a life, but to send a chilling message to an entire society. Today, we're stepping back in time to explore two of the most brutal forms of execution ever devised. These aren't just methods of punishment, they're powerful symbols of authority and social control from the ancient world. So, prepare yourself as we delve into the grim realities of justice from long ago. Our first stop is ancient Rome, a civilization known for its engineering marvels and legal systems, but also for its uncompromising methods of punishment. Among the most feared was crucifixion. This wasn't a quick or merciful end. It was a slow, agonizing, and public spectacle reserved for slaves, rebels, and the lowest-ranking criminals. Imagine being led through the streets, forced to carry the heavy wooden crossbeam, the very instrument of your own demise. The destination was usually a public place, like a roadside or a hill, outside the city walls, ensuring maximum visibility. The process itself was torturous. The victim was affixed to the cross, either by ropes or nails driven through the wrists and feet. Once raised, they were left exposed to the elements, the blistering sun, the cold nights, and any scavenging animals. Death didn't come from the wounds themselves, but from a slow process of exhaustion and asphyxiation. As the body sagged, breathing became increasingly difficult. To take a breath, the person had to push up against the nails in their feet, an act of excruciating pain. This grim cycle could last for days. But why was crucifixion so important to the Romans? It was all about power and humiliation. By executing people in this manner, Rome sent a crystal-clear message. This is what happens when you defy us. It was the ultimate display of dominance, stripping a person of all dignity and making an example of them. The public nature of the execution served as a powerful deterrent, a constant reminder of the state's absolute authority. It wasn't just about punishing one individual. It was about terrorizing the population into submission. The horror of crucifixion was a strategic tool of control in the vast Roman Empire. Now, let's journey to another part of the ancient world to examine a different, yet equally grim, method: stoning. This form of execution is mentioned in various ancient legal codes and religious texts, and its horror lies not just in the physical act, but in its deep community involvement. Unlike an execution carried out by a single official, stoning was a communal event. The condemned person would be brought to a designated spot, and a crowd of people from the community would gather. Then, one by one, they would begin to throw stones. The process was deliberately brutal and drawn out. The goal wasn't a swift death. The stones were typically large enough to cause injury, but small enough that it would take many of them to be fatal. This ensured a slow, painful end for the condemned, who would suffer countless blows before finally succumbing to their injuries. It was a terrifying ordeal, not just for the person being punished, but for everyone who watched and participated. So, what was the psychological purpose behind this? Stoning transformed a punishment into a collective act of purification. By having the community participate, the responsibility for the execution was shared among everyone present. No single person was the executioner. The entire community was. This reinforced social bonds and group solidarity against the person who had supposedly violated the community's laws or moral standards. It was a way for a society to physically and symbolically cast out a member deemed unworthy or dangerous. The act of each person throwing a stone was a personal affirmation of the group's values and a rejection of the transgressor. It was a powerful, visceral ritual that left no doubt about the consequences of breaking the social contract. Both crucifixion and stoning reveal so much about the societies that practiced them. They weren't just about justice. They were about sending messages, reinforcing power structures, and maintaining social order through fear and public participation. While these practices are thankfully a part of the distant past for most of us, studying them gives us a stark look into the different ways human societies have dealt with crime and dissent. Throughout history, Thanks for joining me on this dark journey into the past. Have you ever wondered why we don't see public floggings or people locked in stocks in the town square anymore? It might seem obvious to us now, but the journey from brutal public spectacle to the justice systems we have today is a fascinating story about the power of human thought and empathy. For centuries, punishment was all about pain and humiliation. The more gruesome, the better, or so the thinking went. The idea was to scare people into behaving. But as societies evolved, a powerful new force began to take hold. Education. As more and more people learned to read, write, and think critically, they started to look at the world around them with fresh eyes. They read the works of great thinkers, they debated ideas in bustling coffee houses, and they began to question traditions that had gone unchallenged for generations. One of the biggest questions they asked was, is all this cruelty actually working? Is it right? This wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was the beginning of a revolution in how we understand justice. Suddenly, it wasn't just the condemned man on the scaffold. It was philosophers, doctors, and even forward-thinking lawmakers who were putting the system of punishment itself on trial. Doctors began to speak out, not just about the physical damage of torture, but the deep, lasting psychological wounds it inflicted. They argued that a person who has been brutalized is not rehabilitated. They are simply broken. They understood that trauma doesn't create a good citizen. It creates a person filled with fear, resentment, and a desire for revenge. At the same time, philosophers were making powerful arguments about something we now take for granted: human dignity. They proposed a radical idea for the time, that every single person, regardless of their crime, has an inherent worth. That being human comes with a right to not be treated like an animal. They argued that a just society does unlower itself to the level of the criminal by using torture. Instead, it should aim to be better, to uphold a standard of decency. This idea of human dignity became a rallying cry for reform. These weren't just abstract debates. They started to influence the people writing the laws. Lawmakers began to argue in parliaments and assemblies that the goal of punishment shouldn't be vengeance, but correction, or at the very least, the protection of society without resorting to barbarism. They began to see that systems built on cruelty were not only immoral but also ineffective. They created a cycle of violence and did nothing to address the root causes of crime. Slowly, painfully, slowly, the laws began to change. Torture was gradually outlawed. Public executions became a thing of the past. The focus started to shift from inflicting pain to concepts like rehabilitation and due process. Governments came to a profound realization: cruelty doesn't create justice. It creates trauma. It damages not only the individual, but society as a whole, eroding the very trust and compassion that hold us together. This journey is far from over, and debates about the nature of justice continue to this day. But the shift away from institutionalized cruelty represents one of humanity's greatest intellectual and moral achievements. It is a testament to the idea that when we educate ourselves and dare to question the world, we can make it a more humane and just place for everyone. The next time you think about our legal system, remember the brave thinkers and reformers who fought. Have you ever noticed how a single act of violence, even one you just see on the news, can leave you feeling unsettled for days? It's not just you. This feeling has a name, and it's a collective weight we all carry. When violence becomes a public spectacle, something profound shifts within us and our communities. It's not just about the immediate victims. It's about the invisible scars left on everyone who witnesses it, directly or indirectly. The constant exposure to aggression, whether in our streets or on our screens, isn't just background noise. It seeps into our subconscious, slowly eroding our sense of safety and peace. We start to see the world through a lens of fear and suspicion, and that changes everything. Think about the youngest members of our society, our children. Their minds are like sponges, absorbing everything around them to learn how the world works. When they grow up in an environment where conflict and hostility are common, they begin to normalize it. They learn that suffering is just a part of life, that cruelty is an acceptable way to interact. This is a devastating lesson. Instead of learning empathy, cooperation, and kindness, they might learn that power comes from intimidation, and that vulnerability is a weakness. This normalization of suffering stunts their emotional growth. It creates a generation that may struggle to form healthy relationships, resolve conflicts peacefully, or even recognize their own emotional pain and the pain of others. We are, in essence, teaching them a language of hurt. and it's a cycle that's incredibly hard to break. This environment of fear does more than just make us anxious. It fundamentally rewires our social connections. Fear is a powerful, primal emotion designed to protect us from immediate threats. But when that threat feels constant and unpredictable, our brains stay in high alert mode. We become more guarded, more suspicious of strangers, and even wary of our neighbors. The natural human instinct to connect, to trust, and to show compassion begins to wither. Why would you offer help to someone if you're worried they might harm you? Why would you open up to others if you fear judgment or betrayal? This erosion of trust is like a slow-acting poison to the spirit of a community. It isolates us, making us feel alone even when we're surrounded by people. The social fabric that holds us together starts to fray, thread by thread. When this breakdown of trust and compassion happens on a mass scale, the consequences are dire. Societies become harsh, polarized, and deeply divided. We retreat into our own tribes, surrounding ourselves only with those who look, think, and act like us. The other becomes a source of fear, not a fellow human being. This us versus them mentality is the fertile ground where prejudice and conflict grow. Political discourse becomes toxic. Community projects stall, and the simple act of living together becomes a source of constant friction. We lose our shared sense of purpose and our ability to solve problems together. A society that was once a vibrant tapestry of different people and ideas becomes a fractured mosaic of isolated, defensive groups. But here's the most important part. This is not an inevitable outcome. We have the power to change the narrative. It starts with a conscious choice. A choice to reject violence as a solution. A choice to cultivate empathy, both in ourselves and in our children. It means actively seeking out stories of hope, cooperation, and kindness to balance the narrative of fear. It means teaching our kids emotional intelligence and peaceful conflict resolution. It means reaching out to our neighbors, starting conversations, and rebuilding those frayed connections, one small act of trust at a time. We can create safe spaces in our communities, support mental health initiatives, and demand a more responsible and compassionate public discourse. It's not easy, and it won't happen overnight, but by consciously choosing connection over division and compassion over fear, we can begin to heal our communities and build a world where everyone feels safe, valued, and understood. Thank you for watching. If this message resonated with you, please share it and subscribe for more conversations that matter.